Before we start today's topic, Project Chanology and its cyber components, let's introduce our guests. We have Tala, Faye, and Peyton. They are classmates and group partners in Professor Vito's class. Let's get started. We've all heard the words Scientology and Anonymous, but a lot of us were not paying attention in January of 2008 when a powder keg blew up on the internet. Tala, could you please give us a summary on Project Chanology?
To give you a brief overview and not to go into too much detail, as I'm sure we will get into that later. Project Chanology started shortly after a disagreement with Tom Cruise's video in the Church of Scientology. On January 14, 2008, a video of Tom Cruise was leaked talking about his personal views on Scientology in an effort to praise the church. When this video had the opposite effect and created mockery of the Church of Scientology issued a Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or DMCA, on the video re-uploads. When this happened, Anonymous stepped in and called Scientology out on their abuse of power, as this was seen as a violation of free speech. And soon after, on January 21st, 2008, they released an official video stating that they will go to war with Scientology. Following this, to put it shortly, there were many waves of global protests, ending with Anonymous giving the final blow to rid Scientology of their tax-exempt status.
I have a bachelor's of science in biology, but I never learned about Scientology. Peyton, why don't you tell us about how the Church of Scientology is viewed around the world?
Yeah, of course. Although it is recognized as a religion by law in the U.S., the Church of Scientology can be classified into 5 categories: religion by law, nonprofit organization, legally disputed resulting in unclear status, not recognized as a religion, and religious status denied or a cult. As you can see from the map, most of Australia, North America, and South America are areas in which Scientology is legally recognized as a religion or religious community, granting it tax-exempt status. While the majority of Africa and Asia have not recognized Scientology as a religion, Russia, Kazakhstan, Mexico, and Chile have explicitly denied Scientology status as a religion, and instead they treat it as a private organization without charitable intentions, sometimes going as far to classify them as a cult.
Wow, I didn't realize that it had such global division on how it was accepted. What about Anonymous? Can you tell me a bit more about them?
Anonymous began as a faction of 4chan, which is a North American image board. Anonymous in itself is a social movement with a network of individuals that engage in political or cultural issues. Due to lack of attribution in cyberspace, members of online hacktivist groups, such as Anonymous, are some of the easiest to join or leave. Anonymous eventually grew into being one of the largest hacktivist groups, as you can see from the graph. The member base was mostly American as a result of the website being hosted on American servers, but following the global reach of Project Chanology's transnational protests, Anonymous's member base began to spread to other countries.
Great. I feel like I really know Anonymous by not knowing them at all. Ethical-ish hackers? Gray hat, maybe? Anyways, moving on to the main topic. Project Chanology, playing off the name 4chan, and cyber warfare. Well, wait, is it right to call it warfare?
Before conducting DDoS attacks against the Church of Scientology, Anonymous released a video declaring war on the church. In the video, Anonymous stated their intentions of freeing members of Scientology and disseminating information about their activities. While Anonymous did declare war on the Church of Scientology, cyber warfare is a bit of a misnomer, because the cyber strategy they employed is better described as hacktivism.
So why did Anonymous not stay anonymous while initiating its attacks on Scientology?
As Gardsky puts it, the absence of attribution is problematic for attackers, which sparks the question, why would an adversary attack and remain anonymous? Paveldi answers with, anonymity might protect an attacker from retribution, but would also prevent him from getting credit for the attack. From the point of view of the victim, there can be no surrender if there is no attribution. If Anonymous ever wanted Scientology to change or surrender their ways, they need to forego their anonymity and show their displeasure with their physical presence.
Seems like Anonymous chose their ground and held to it. Let's go more into the cybersecurity aspect of this now. After Scientology tried to take the video down, we know Anonymous responded with their video. But what other action did they take around that time?
One action they took was a distributed denial of service, or DDoS attack. A DDoS attack is a method of cyber disruption that attacks a target by taking over a group of computers in what is called a botnet, which then sends false requests that prevent the target from fielding legitimate requests. DDoS attacks were as common as early as 1999, and in contrast to normal DDoS attacks, where the processing power of users is stolen without their consent, members of Anonymous freely offered the computers in DDoS attacks against the church. The Church of Scientology's network was not equipped to handle this advanced method of disruption attacks orchestrated by Anonymous over the course of 5 days, and they wisely transferred management of their domain to Prolexic Technologies, a company that specialized in protecting websites from DDoS attacks.
An example of one of these attacks is when 20-year-old Brian Mettenbrink from Nebraska was part of Anonymous and decided to bring down Scientology.org via a DDoS attack using a cyber tool called the Low Orbit Ion Cannon, which is an open source network stress attack application. Basically, you input the website, make sure the IP and all settings are correct. It's very easy to use, not too technical to run, and what it does in this case is tell them to send their website to his computer. Brian experienced about 800,000 requests, and it brought down the website a couple of times just with his machine alone. 6 months later, the FBI caught him, and he served 1 year in prison and 1 year probation for his weekend of DDoS attacks.
The book Cyber Strategy, The Evolving Character, Power, and Corrosion by Brandon Ballerino describes DDoS attacks as a disruption, which is a type of cyber corrosion. He continues to explain that a disruption attack is a low-cost and low-payoff attack that would have disrupted the daily lives of the receiver of the attack, but is generally not enough to compel the rival to retaliate. When comparing this to Project Chanology, it could be possible that if Anonymous were to only do these DDoS attacks without socially degrading Scientology's reputation, that Scientology would not have been compelled to involve the FBI, send private investigators to track individuals, and send cease and desist letters out to Anonymous members as well.
Thanks for explaining. Now, before we go on, we have the basic knowledge of the two groups and the cybersecurity part explained, but how do these groups compare?
I'll take this one. What we see is both groups are secretive, but Scientology seems to be more hierarchical in structure, while Anonymous is more like a group of birds in flight. When one decides to change direction, they all do. There's no real authority within Anonymous, meaning literally anyone can join, and all members aren't actually hackers. The Church of Scientology all have relatively the same beliefs, but within Anonymous, there are few and far between that have the skill to pull off something as big as Project Chanology. The Church of Scientology is a group of people who all have the same motive and goal. Anonymous also started out as a group who wanted to do something socially, and then turned into an activism group focused on exposing political groups and organizations that censor information and also focus on human rights. Because Anonymous opposes censorship and control, they targeted the church after they were accused of censoring some of their information online.
Thanks. Let's take a moment to discuss the events that followed the initial January incident.
The rest of the year was spent with protests happening every few weeks. People posted up outside of the Scientology churches wearing Guy Fawkes masks, one of the symbols now synonymous with Anonymous. They were protesting Scientology to help get people out of the cult. The protests happened across the globe, taking place in the United States, Canada, Israel, Australia, England, and Ireland. This continued on through 2009 and culminated in further attacks on the tax-exempt status of the quote-unquote church.
I want to discuss the tax exemption status of Scientology. Tell me more about that.
The church was first granted federal tax-exempt status in the U.S. in 1954, and in 1967, the IRS took away the tax exemption status. The IRS eventually turned around on their decision and reinstated the church as a tax-exempt church once more in 1993. After this happened, there was another group called Cult of the Dead Cow who tried to take down the Church of Scientology because of the newly reinstated tax exemption. The next major attempt at removing the tax exemption was in 2008 when Anonymous started lobbying the IRS to investigate as the final attempt to take them down during Project Chanology. And even more recently, in 2017, Trump started to have people investigate in an attempt to remove the tax exemption.
Let's move to the political component, free speech. While we could debate whether or not the internet should be censored or to what length, let's talk about it in terms of, does Scientology have a right to remove content that is potentially harmful to their organization? Does Anonymous have the right to deny that on the grounds of freedom of speech?
Looking back, it's pretty clear that posting harmful content targeting an organization is not an issue. You can look to the various organizations promoting conspiracies against specific people or groups on YouTube for examples. It really is the Wild West on the internet. If you have the ability to do something, it's hard for someone to stop you. In this case, Anonymous perceived a violation of free speech as well as an abuse of power by the Church of Scientology to suppress the spread of the video and decided to step in. Even if the video did end up getting taken down, the dissemination of private information to the public did significant damage to Scientology.
We'll likely be discussing similar issues for as long as the internet exists. I want to talk about the aftermath of this event. Beyond the protests relating to Scientology, what more is there? Has Project Chanology influenced other political events, nationally or internationally?
An example would be the 2011 Egyptian Revolution. In the Egyptian Revolution, hundreds of thousands of Egyptian civilians came out to protest for better rights. Well, does this sound familiar? Citizens uprising to take down an unjust government? It is one of the main messages that Anonymous stands behind, that the people hold more power together than the government does. Remember, after Egypt suppressed the press, Anonymous stepped in by tweeting on behalf of the people in Egypt, shut down the government sites, and helped in getting cameras set up for live feed websites around Egypt. Then after the government shut down their internet, Anonymous helped in creating a way for citizens to access the internet by teaching them how to use third-party sites. It could be that since Project Chanology happened, the formation and quick action on Anonymous's part was better connected and prepared to make that political difference.
Another example is the Church of Scientology started operating in Germany in 1970. Germany has about 4,000 active Scientologists. Germany also does not consider Scientology a religion. It's actually seen as an abusive business hiding under the facade of a religion, pursuing political goals that conflict with German values and their constitution. Scientologists in Germany face specific political and economic restrictions. They are barred from membership in some major political parties. Businesses and other employers use so-called sect fillers to expose a prospective business partner's or employee's association with the organization. German Interior Minister started a process aiming at banning Scientology in late 2007, but abandoned it a year later, finding faulty legal grounds. As of 2017, polls suggest that 2/3 of Germany consider Scientology dangerous. As noted by the religious scholar Hubert Seward, Scientology came to be seen as a serious political danger that not only threatened to turn individuals into willless zombies, but was also conspiring to overthrow the democratic constitution of the state. While there have been attempts to ban Scientology, it still remains legal and is allowed to operate just without the tax exemption status.
Another event resulting as an aftermath was when Australian Senator Nick Xenophon cited a documentary that revealed information about Scientology as the basis for wanting to revoke their tax exemption status in Australia. The allegations made were regarding the church blackmailing and spying on members, as well as unethical operational behavior. The senator reported meeting with former members who gave him serious concerns about the level of harm Scientology was able to deliver to individuals liable to get caught up in cult-like activities. Seeking to strip them of your tax-exempt status, the senator called for an investigation into the validity of these allegations against the Church of Scientology.
Nearing the end of our time together, what are your takeaways from this?
What we are seeing here really is more than just Scientology versus Anonymous. We are seeing a story on how Anonymous developed hacktivism. Throughout Project Chanology, you see that after Anonymous created the social movement with waves of transnational protests, then later, however, they supplemented it with lobbying the IRS online to remove Scientology's tax exemption. In doing so, they have shown that hacktivism can be more than a social movement by supporting it with a political movement as well.
Thanks for tuning in, folks. We've had a great discussion about Project Chanology, the cybersecurity event that sparked international protests. Don't join us next week because no one will be here. Thanks again.